Hi, everyone. I know many of you have been very patiently waiting for me to get to the next part of this, so here it is. Hi, everyone. This is the third part of Sunshine. This is for Kitty. This is another one of their Patreon commissions. Thank you for supporting me. You can support me on Patreon. There are currently no commission spots open just because I get to keep them limited because I'm not a robot and I can't do a million of these a month. But I'm spending today catching up on all of them. So this is the third part of Sunshine, and the split was designated by Kitty. So thank you. What the hell is this book? Let's do this. I dreamed. I dreamed as if the dream was waiting for me, waiting for the moment I fell asleep. I dreamed of my grandmother. I dreamed of walking by the lake with her. At first, the dream was more like a memory. I was little again, and she was holding my hand, and had to skip occasionally to keep up with her. I'd been proud of having her for a grandmother, and was sorry that I only ever saw her alone at the lake. Would have liked my school friends to meet her. Their grandmothers were all so ordinary. Some of them were nice and some of them were not so nice, but they were all sort of soft-edged. I didn't know how to put it even to myself. My grandmother wasn't hard or sharp, but there wasn't anything uncertain about her. She was unambiguously herself. I admired her hugely. She had long hair, and when the wind was blowing off the lake, it would get into a tremendous tangle, and sometimes she would let me brush it afterward at the cottage. She usually wore long, full skirts and soft shoes that made no sound, whatever she was walking on. My parents split up when I was 6. I didn't see my grandmother for the first year after. It turned out that my mother had gone so far as to hire some ward crafters, smiths, scribes, spooks, the usual range, and on what money I don't know, to prevent anyone in my dad's family from finding us. My father hadn't wanted to let us go. While his family are supposed to be some of the good guys, it's very hard not to do something you can do when you're angry and it will get you what you want. After the first year and a day, he had probably cooled off, and my mom let the fancy wards lapse. My grandmother located us almost at once, and my mother, who can drive herself nuts sometimes, by her own sense of fairness, agreed to let me see her. At first, I didn't want to see her because it had been a whole year and I'd been sick for a lot of it, and my mother had to tell me, that sense of fairness again, what she'd done, and a little bit, scaled down to my age, of why. I was only 7, but it had been a bad year. That conversation with my mother was one of those moments when my world really changed. I realized that I was going to be a grown-up myself someday and have to make horrible decisions like this one too. So I agreed to see my gran again, and then I was glad I did. I was so happy to have her back. She and I had been meeting at the lake every few weeks for a little over a year when one afternoon she said, "I don't like what I'm about to do, but I can't think of anything better. My dear, I have to ask if you will keep a secret from your mother for me." I looked at her in astonishment. This wasn't the sort of thing grown-ups did. They went around having secrets behind your back all the time about things that were horribly important to you, like my mom not telling me she'd hired the ward crafters, and then pretended they didn't. There'd been a lot of that nobody explained to me before my parents broke up, and I hadn't forgotten. Even at 6 or 7, I knew that my mom's ward crafters were the tip of an iceberg, but I still didn't know how much. But I still didn't know much about the iceberg. I didn't know, for example, that my father might have been a sorcerer till years later. And sometimes grown-up, there's just details thrown out in this book, and I'm like, what the hell? And sometimes grown-ups said things like, oh, maybe you better not tell your parents about this, which either meant get out of there fast now, or that they knew you would tell anyway because you were only a kid, but then they could get mad at you when you did. That this had happened several times with some of my dad's business associates is one of the reasons my mom left. But I knew my gran loved me, and I knew she was safe. I knew she never really asked me anything bad, and I knew that she really, really meant it, that I had to keep the secret from my mother. Okay, I'd said. My gran sighed. I know that your mother means the best for you, and in many ways she's right. I'm very glad she got custody of you, and not your dad, although he was very bitter about it at the time. I scowled. I never saw my dad. Once my gran had found me starting to write, let me do that again. Once my gran had found me, he started writing me a lot of postcards, but I never saw him. And the postmarks on the cards were always blurry, so you couldn't see where they'd been sent from. All the postmarks were blurry. 2 or 3 a week sometimes. But she's wrong that simply keeping you ignorant of your father's heritage will make it as if that heritage doesn't exist. It does exist. You can choose to be your mother's daughter in all things, but it must be a choice. I'm going to provide you with the means for making that choice. Otherwise, someday, that heritage you know nothing about may get you in a lot of trouble. I must have looked frightened because she took my hand in hers and gave them a squeeze. Or perhaps someday you will be in a lot of trouble and it will get you out of it. We were sitting on the porch of the cabin by the lake. We'd been walking earlier and had picked a little posy of wildflowers. She'd fetched a mug from the kitchen and filled it with water, and the flowers were standing in that on the rickety little table that still sat on the porch. We'd been walking in the sun, which was very warm, and were now sitting in the shade of the trees, which was pleasingly cool. I could feel the sweat on my face drying in the breeze. My gran pulled one of the flowers out of the mug, put it between my two hands, closed my hands together over it so that it was invisible, and put her hands over mine. Now, what have you got in your hands? She said. What is this some... Oh, I'm kind of scared. This was a funny sort of game, I said, smiling. A flower. What else could you have inside your hands instead? What else is so small you could hide it completely? Doesn't weigh very much, doesn't itch or tickle, is so soft you can barely feel it's there. A feather, I said. Feather, good. Now think feather. I thought feather. I thought a small gray, brown, white feather, a sparrow, something like that. There was an odd, slightly buzzy sensation in my hands, under her hands. It was a little bit sick-making, but not very much. Now open your hands. She took hers away from mine, and I opened them. There was a feather, a little gray-brown-white feather there. No flower. I looked up at her. I knew that one of the reasons my mom had left my dad was because he wouldn't stop doing spell working and doing business with other spell workers. I knew it came from a big magic-handling family, but not everybody in it did magic. I'd never done any. You did that, I said. No, I helped. But you did it. It's in your blood, child. If it weren't, that feather would still be a flower. It was your hands that touched it, your hands that carried the charm. I swear, every page, some new feature of this world melts my brain. I held up the feather. It looked real and felt like a real feather. Would you like to try it again? She said. I nodded. She told me that we only wanted to do little things the first time, so we turned the feather into a different kind of feather, and then we turned it into several kinds of flower, and then several kinds of leaf, and then we turned it into 3 unburned matchsticks, and then we turned it into a tiny swatch of fabric, yellow with blue dots, and then we turned it back into the flower to bend to begin with. First rule, return everything to its proper shape if you can, unless there's some compelling reason not to. Now we've done enough for one afternoon, and we want to say thank you, and we also want to sweep up any rubbish we've left. Like sweeping the floor and wiping the counters after you've been making cookies. She taught me 3 words to say, and lit a small bar of incense, and we sat silently till it had burned itself out. There, she said. Are you tired? A little, I said. I thought about it. Not a lot. Are you not? That is interesting. Then I was right that I had to show you. She smiled. It was kind, but not a reassuring smile. She was also right that I couldn't tell my mother. She's a mage. How? Oh, my God. My mother had stopped bringing me out and taking me back after the first few visits, although she made me wear a homecoming charm. I realized later that this might have looked like the most colossal insult to my gran, but my mother wouldn't have meant it that way. My gran didn't take it that way. I hung it on a tree when I arrived, and only took it down again when I was leaving. My gran walked me out to the road and waited till the bus came into sight, made sure the bus driver knew where I was going. The charm wouldn't have stopped the bus for me if I'd forgotten to pull the cord, and I was still only a kid. Kissed me and watched me climb aboard. Till next time, she said, which is what she always said. We played that game many times. I was soon doing it without her hands on mine, and she showed me how to do certain other things too, some of which I could do easily, some of which I couldn't do at all. One afternoon, she pulled a ring finger. Let me do this again. One afternoon, she pulled a ring off her finger and gave it to me. I'm tired of that red stone, she said. Give me a green stone. There were, of course, rules to what I at first thought was a game. The more dense the material, the harder to shift, so stone or gem is more difficult than flower or feather. Anything that has been altered by human interference is harder than anything that hasn't been, so a polished, faceted stone is more difficult than a rough piece of ore. Worked metal is the worst. It is both heavy and dense, and the least decisively itself. Something that is handled and used is harder than something that isn't, so a tool would be harder to shift than a plaque that hung on the wall. And a stone worn in a ring is going to be harder than a decorative bit of rock that stood on a shelf. It is easier to change a thing into something like itself. A feather into another feather, a flower into another flower. A flower into a leaf is easier than a flower into a feather. A worked metal is always hard. Even a safety pin into several straight pins is difficult. Even a 1968 penny into a 1986 penny is difficult. This is so cool. She hadn't told me any of the details that first day when I turned a flower into a bit of fabric. It showed how good she was, that she could create not just human-made fabric, but smooth yellow fabric with blue dots instantly with no fuss, because that's what I was trying to do. And she wanted me to have a taste of what she was going to teach me, without fluster or explanation. But that had been nearly a year ago, and I knew more now. The ring was warm from her finger. I closed my hands and concentrated. I didn't have anything to do to the setting. Let me do that again. I didn't have to do anything to the setting, to the worked metal. Changing the stone was going to be big enough. I'd only ever tackled lake pebbles before, and they were pretty onerous. I'd never tried a faceted stone, and this was a ring she wore all the time, and she was a practicing magic handler. Objects that have a lot of contact with magic, however peripherally, tend to get a bit steeped, but I should still be able to do it, I thought. Just remember this was a book about vampires, like 10 pages ago. What is happening? But I couldn't. I knew before I opened my hands that I hadn't done it. I tried 3 times, and all I got was a heavy ache in my neck and shoulders from trying too hard. I felt like crying. It was the first time I had failed to change something. Transmuting was the thing I was best at, and she wouldn't have asked me to do something I shouldn't have been able to do. We were sitting on the porch again, in the shade of the trees. "Let us try once more," she said, "but not here. Come." We stood up. I still had the ring in one hand, and went down the steps to the ground, then down to the shore, and into the sunlight. It was another hot, bright day, and the sky was as blue as a sapphire. I wasn't ready for what happened. When I closed my hands around the ring again and put all my frustration into this final attempt, there was a blast of something. I shuddered as it shot through me. For the merest moment, my hands felt so hot it was as if they would burst into flame. And it was all over, and my hands fell apart because I was shaking so badly. My gran put her arm around me. I held up my unsteady hand, and we both looked. My ring had a green stone, all right, and the setting, which had been thin plain gold, had erupted into a thick wild mess of curlicues, with several more tiny green stones nested in their center. What the hell? I thought it was hideous, and I could feel my eyes filling with tears. I was, after all, only 9 years old, because this time I had done so much worse than nothing. But she laughed in delight. "It's lovely. Oh, my, it's so drastic, isn't it? No, I'm truly pleased. You have done splendidly. I have wondered. Listen, child, this is the important thing for you to remember. Your element is sunlight. It's a little unusual, which is why I didn't spot it before, but you can probably do almost anything in bright sunshine." Well, shit. Oh, so what does that mean with the vamp? Oh, God, I have so many questions about how this is going to work. Like, what? Oh, okay. Why didn't she use any of the magic handling while dealing with the vampire? Anyway, she wouldn't let me try to shift it back. I thought she wouldn't let me because she knew I was too tired and shaken, that she'd do it herself after we parted. But she didn't. She was wearing it as I'd changed it the next time I saw her. Excuse me. We'd never left anything changed before. We'd always changed it back. I didn't know the words you said over something you weren't going to change back. Perhaps I should have asked her. But I thought of that ring as a mistake, a blunder, and I didn't want to call her attention to it, even though every time she moved that hand, it called my attention to it. I couldn't even beg her to let me try to shift it back because I was afraid I'd only do something even uglier. I might have asked her someday, but I only saw her a few more times after I changed her ring. We'd been meeting nearly every month, sometimes oftener, through my 10th year. After my 10th birthday, I only saw her once more. All the grown-ups knew the wars were coming, and even us kids had some notion, but I never thought about the wars coming to our lake, or that I might not see my grandmother again. We didn't discuss sunlight again either. I didn't tell her that my nickname at the coffee house had been Sunshine, since before Mom had married Charlie. I didn't know when I first met him that he said, "Hey, Sunshine," to all the little kids, and I thought he was making a joke about my name. Well, what Mom had made of my name after she left my dad. Ray. Sun rays, right? By the time I found out, Sunshine was my name. And then, because I was the only kid at that point that hung around the coffee house, the regulars started calling me Sunshine too. Pretty soon it was my name. It was so much my name that I didn't think of it when my gran first told me that sunlight was my element. Most people, even my mom, still call me Sunshine. What is this book? I dreamed all of this. Remembered and dreamed, lying on the ballroom floor, with my head on a sack with a loaf of bread in it, and a vampire leaning against the wall 20 feet away. Yeah, let's remember that all of this is happening. All of it was as clear and vibrant as if I were living it all over again, complete with the strange feeling of being a child again, when you know you're an adult. Then the real dream began. I seemed to be back on the cottage porch with my grandmother, that first time when we changed the flower. Only this time we didn't sit in the shade, but in strong sunlight. The flower was in my hands, and her hands were over mine. But I was the adult I was now, and neither of us spoke. I closed my hands and opened them, and the flower was now a feather. I closed my hands and opened them, and the feather was 3 matchsticks. I closed my hands and opened them, and the matchsticks were a leaf. I closed and opened them again, and now I was holding her plain gold ring with the red stone. The red stone flared in a sudden bright ray of the sun before I closed my hands again. Close, open, and there was the Baroque monstrosity twinkling with green. Close, open. My jackknife lay between my palms. The little jackknife that usually lived in the pocket of my jeans, that now lay hidden in my bra. Close, open. A key. A key. A key for what? What does that mean? What does that mean? Oh, my God. I woke up. It was still daylight, but the sky was reddening with sunset. I was painfully stiff from sleeping on the floor. It was all still true. I was chained by the ankle, trapped in an empty house with a vampire. What I had dreamed was only a dream, and the sun was setting. I was also still horribly, murderously tired. I couldn't have had more than about 4 hours sleep. If I'd had one of those hollow teeth that spies used to have in cheap thrillers, I'd have bitten down on it then. I didn't see how I could face another night. Beau's gang would be back, of course, to see how we were getting on. And my vampire, what a grotesque thought, my vampire, would have to decide all over again however the question presented itself to him, whether he was going to let Beau win or not. I rolled over with a groan. He was sitting cross-legged in the precise center of the wall, watching me. I pulled myself into a sitting position. My mouth tasted beyond foul. I'd left the water bottle within his reach, but he hadn't had any more. I made myself stand up, all my bones hurt, rather than crawl, and went toward him and picked it up. I was getting used to approaching him. It was true, what you've read, about how you can't maintain a pitch of terror for very long. Your body just can't do it. I was sick with dread. I at least half wanted to die to get it over with, but I walked to within an arm's length of a hungry vampire and picked up my bottle of water and drank out of it with no more hesitation than if he'd been Mel. Do you want any more? He took it out of my hand and disposed of half of what was left. Again, I didn't see him drink. When he handed it back to me, I stood there staring at it. I wanted to finish it. I was assuming Beau's gang would bring more, in the interest of keeping me attractive, but I felt curiously reluctant to wipe the top off under his eye. He said, "You will contract no infection by sharing water with me." That's slightly comforting. Not really. There was a curious new quality in his hitherto expressionless voice. I thought about it for a while. To do with the tone, something. He sounded amused. I forgot not to look in his eyes. What if you've been, drinking bad blood? What happens when you pour water into alcohol? No, it mixes. It is no longer water. It is alcohol and clean of life things. Clean of life things. I liked that. It is diluted alcohol. This alcohol is still strong enough, and as you might say, self-regenerating. His eyes were not so murky as they'd been last night. Presumably it was the water, diluting something else. Please do not look in my eyes. It is coming night again, and I still do not want Beau to win. I jerked my gaze away. Bad sign that he'd had to tell me. Good sign that he still wanted Beau to lose. Good sign for what? Beau still had us. It's not as though this was some kind of trial, challenge, that when we got to the end, if we'd survived, they'd let us go free. This was it. It was only a question of really soon or slightly less soon. Yeah, also very comforting. I wondered what Mom and Charlie and Mel and the rest were thinking, if Emile knew yet. I had not showed up on time to make cinnamon rolls in 7 years. I'd never missed a morning till today. I never got around to taking holidays, and I was never ill. Charlie, who never got sick either, used to say, "Clean living," which infuriated Mom, who had flu every winter. Would they have told the police I was missing? Probably. But the police would have said that I was free and over 21, and to tell them again in a few days if I still hadn't turned up. Pat or Jesse might be able to make them look harder once they were looking at all. But I wasn't going to be alive in a few days. And our local cops were nice guys, but not exactly rocket scientists. Not that rocket science would help me either. There would be no reason to think Soph should get involved. Who else would Mom or Mel ask? Yolande? But she wouldn't know anything either. They'd figured out that my car was missing. Would anyone think to go out to the lake and look at the old cabin? Not likely. Nobody else went out there but me, and I hadn't been there in years. I'd never even taken Mel there when we went hiking. I didn't think there were any regular patrols out there either. There wasn't any known reason the lake needed patrolling, and there were the bad spots. But if someone had gone out to the cabin and found my car, then what? I wasn't there, and I doubted vampires left clues. I like the way that she thinks. She's got this almost black sense of humor about the way she interprets everything, and it's in her narration. I really like it. You heard about vampire trouble on the news when people started finding bloodless bodies with fang marks, and this house was very well guarded by the bad spot behind us. I drank the rest of the water. I didn't wipe the mouth first. I thought, is my arm or my dress likely to be any more sanitary? I turned toward the window. I felt the vampire watching me. I have to pee, I said irritably. I'm going to do it out the window. Will you please not watch? I will tell you when I am done. Since I'd never heard him move before, he must have made a noise so I could hear it. I looked, and he turned his back. I had my pee, feeling ridiculous. Okay, I said. He turned around and returned to watching me. His face is expressionless as before. As he had seemed to grow smaller as the sun rose, he seemed to grow larger as the sun set. That last light waned, and so did I. I was cold as well as sick and frightened, and my headache felt bigger than my head. I wrapped myself in the blanket and huddled as near to the corner as my chain would let me. I remembered the other loaf of bread and pulled it out, began to eat it, thinking it might help, but it sat in my stomach like a lump of stone, and I didn't eat very much. Then I hunched down and curled up and waited. This is agonizing. It was full dark. The moon would be up later, but at the moment I could see almost nothing. On a clear night it is never quite dark outside, but we were inside. The windows left gray rectangles on the floor, but I could not see beyond them. I knew he could see in the dark. I knew vampires can smell live blood. No, I thought, that hardly matters. He isn't going to forget about me any more than I am going to forget about him, even if I can't see or hear him. Even if I've got so used to the vampire smell I'm not noticing it anymore. Which just made it worse. I thought I would have to see him cross the gray rectangle between him and me. I was pretty sure his chain wasn't long enough to let him go round. I knew I wouldn't hear him. But I hadn't seen him drink either. I bit down on my lips. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. I almost screamed when I heard his voice out of the darkness. They are coming now. Oh, God. Listen, stand up, fold your blanket and lay it neatly down. Shake your dress out. Comb your hair with your fingers. Sit again if you wish, but sit a little distance from the corner. Yes, nearer me. Remember that 3 feet more or less makes no difference to me. You might as well. Sit up straight. Perhaps cross your ankles. Do you understand? What? Why? Why does she need to do any of that? Oh, I don't like how he did that. How sudden it was. It was just like, oh, this is happening. Yes, I croaked or squeaked. I folded the blanket and laid it down. I wrapped the sack tidily around the remains of the bread. I put the empty water bottle with it. I shook my dress out. It was probably a mess, but there was nothing I could do about it. My hair actually looks a bit better if it doesn't get combed too often, so I tried to pull my fingers through it the way I would have if I were in front of the mirror at home. I wiped my face on my hem again. I felt unspeakably grubby and grimy. Ironically, perhaps, since I was still whole, I felt defiled. I certainly did not feel attractive. But I smoothed my skirt before I sat down again, just inside the darkness on my side of the gray rectangle, a good 6 feet from my corner. My chain lay slack, lazily curved. Good, he said from the darkness. A for effort, I thought. Junianovsky would be proud of me. They are coming is perhaps a relative term. It seemed to me, my nerves shrieking with strain, that it was a very long time before the chandelier suddenly rattled ferociously and then burst into light. The candles were all new and tall again. My gran had told me that setting fire to things from a distance was a comparatively easy trick, which helped explain why so many houses got burned down during the wars. What the fuck? But the houses were already there. He didn't build them first. That 2-second rattle had given me enough warning to swallow any cry, to force myself to remain as I was, ankles crossed, hands lying loosely one in the other, palms upturned and open. I doubted I was fooling anyone, but at least I was trying. Well, it's creepy. There were a dozen of them. I hadn't counted last night, so I didn't know if there had been more or less. I recognized Beau's lieutenant, and the one who had been my other guard. There are some people who say that all vampires look alike, but they don't, any more than all humans look alike. How many live people outside the staff in those asylums have seen a lot of vampires anyway? These 12 were all thin and whippy-looking, and that was about the only clear similarity among them. And of course, that they were vampires, and they moved like vampires, and they smelled like vampires, and were motionless like vampires when they weren't moving. Beau said you'd hold out. Just to be annoying, said Beau's lieutenant. Beau understands you. Boy, what the fuck is this? Oh, it's so creepy. I thought. He's frightened. That was supposed to be an insult, Beau's understanding, and he can't pull it off. And then I thought, I must be imagining things. Vampire voices are as weird as vampire motion and as unreadable as vampire faces. Hell, I can't even tell the boy vampires from the girl vampires. How do I know what vampire fear sounds like? If vampires feel fear. But the thought repeated. He's frightened. I remembered how reluctant they'd seemed last night, bringing me here. Let's get it over with, Beau's lieutenant had said. I remembered how they didn't want to get too close to their guests, and how they did most of their talking from near the door, farther than his chain would stretch. How the vampire who'd held me had dropped me and run when he realized his friends were leaving him behind. She's still sane, though, Connie. It's harder if you keep them till they've gone mad, you know, and the blood's not as sweet. Beau finds this very disappointing, as I'm sure you do, but that's the way humans are. You wouldn't want to waste what he brought you, would you? What are they doing? What are they doing? They were all standing just beyond the chandelier, so not quite halfway across the room. They had fanned out into a ragged semicircle. As Beau's lieutenant spoke, he took an ambling step toward us. The others fanned out a little more. Oh, boy. My poor weary heart was beating desperately, hopelessly in my throat again. This reminded me of any human gang cornering its victim. However wary they were of Bo's guess, they were still 12-1, and the one was chained to the wall with ward signs stamped all over the shackle. I couldn't help myself. I curled my stretched-out legs under me. I wanted to cross my arms in front of my breast, but I reminded myself that this was useless, just as curling my legs up was useless. So I compromised, learned and leaned on one hand, the other one in my lap. I managed not to squeeze it into a fist, although this wasn't easy. The vampires, all except the one sitting against the wall next to me, took another slow, floating, apparently aimless step forward. I was pressing my back so hard against the wall, my spine hurt. I wished I knew what was going on. Why were Bo and his guest old enemies? But then even if I did know what was going on, how would that help me? What I wanted, to get out alive, didn't seem one of the options. So I might as well distract myself with wanting to know what was going on. It's an interesting way to think about your impending death. They didn't want to get too close, but they were still moving closer. I couldn't think of any reason this could be good news. I never saw it coming this time either. What? What? Saw what coming? They were vampires, I heard Bo's lieutenant saying, as if his words were coming from some other universe. Perhaps you just need a little encouragement, Connie. The words seemed to happen at human speed. Presumably this was because he wanted me to hear them. Oh, God. In the universe where my body was, I was picked up, and something sharp sliced high across my breast, just below the collarbones, and above the neckline of my dress, and then I was thrown down, and my face banged into something hard, and I felt my lips split. I heard, "Since you don't seem to like feet," and the goblin giggle from last night. And then they were gone. I was laying across my fellow captive's lap. The cut in my breast had been so quick that it was only starting to hurt. I was bleeding fresh, warm red blood all over a half-starved vampire. I felt his hands on my bare shoulders. I snatched myself away at what was no doubt good speed for a human. He let me go. I slid backward on my knees, skidding on my slippery red skirt, clutching at my front, feeling the blood sliding through my fingers, dripping on the floor, leaving a blood trail, a pool, more blood oozing from my lip, leaking down my chin. He still hadn't moved. How was he resisting this? But this time, when I felt him looking at me, I had to look back. I had to look into his eyes, into green eyes as emeralds, as green as the stones in my grandmother's awful ring. Sorry, not wig. A green wig? What? You could stop me, or any vampire, if your will is strong enough. I felt my hands tumble from my breast. I leaned forward. I was going to crawl toward him. I was kneeling in my own blood, smearing it across the floor as I crept toward him. My blood was spattered on his naked chest, across one arm, the arm with a wheal on it. Don't look. Look into his eyes, vampire eyes. If your will is strong enough. Desperately, I tried to think of anything. My grandmother's ring, which was the color of these eyes. My grandmother. Sunlight is your element. But it was darkness here, darkness barely lessened by candlelight. The candlelight was there, or was only there so that my weak human eyes could be more easily drawn by mesmeric vampire eyes. But I remember light, real light, daylight, sunlight. Hey, sunshine. I am Sunshine. Sunshine is my name. I remembered a song Charlie used to sing. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. I heard him singing it. No, I heard me singing it, thin, wavering, with no discernible tune. But it was my voice. The light in the green eyes snapped off, and I fell backward as if I'd been dropped. I turned and scuttled from my corner. I burrowed under my blanket, and I stayed there. Whew, that is a close call. I must have slept again. Silly thing to do. Was there a sensible thing to do? Perhaps I fainted. I woke suddenly, knowing it was 4 a.m. and time to go make cinnamon rolls. But this time when I woke up, I knew at once where I was. I was still in that ballroom, still chained to that wall. I was still alive. I was so tired. I sat up. It would be dawn soon. The candles had burned out while I slept, but there was dim gray light coming through the windows. I could see some pink starting on the horizon. I sighed. I didn't want to turn around and look at him. I knew he was still sitting in the middle of the wall. I knew he hadn't moved. I knew it as I knew that Bo's gang had been frightened. Why? What are they afraid of? The blood from my split lip had stuck my mouth together, and when I licked it unstuck and yawned, it split again, with a sharp rip of pain that made my eyes water. Damn. I touched my breast dubiously. It was clotted and sticky. The slash had been high, where it was only skin over bone. I hadn't, after all, lost much blood, although it was a long gash and messy. I didn't want to turn around. He had let me go last night. He'd remembered that he didn't want Bo to win. Perhaps my singing had sounded like the singing of a rational creature. But the sight of my blood had almost been too much for him. I didn't want to show him my front again. Maybe the scab would be too much of a come-on. I sucked at my lip. I just feel like I've just been dropped into a nightmare, and I don't understand it all, and it's so entertaining. With my back to him, wrapped in my blanket, I watched the sun rise. It was going to be another brilliant day. Good. I needed sunlight now, but I also needed as many hours as possible before sunset. How long could I afford to wait? Charlie would be brewing the coffee by now. The sun was bright on the water of the lake. This would have to do. I stood up and dropped my blanket. If the vampire had been telling the truth, I was safe from him now until sunset. I turned around and looked at the sunlight coming in the two windows I had to choose from. For no explicable reason, I preferred the window nearer him. I avoided looking at him. I stepped into the black of friendly sunlight and knelt down. I'm sorry, the block of friendly sunlight. I was like, what? What does that mean? Sorry, excuse me, I misspoke. I pulled my little jackknife from my bra and held it between my my two hands, fingers extended, palms together as if I was praying. I suppose I was. I hadn't tried to change anything in 15 years. What? I'd only ever done it with my grandmother, and after she'd gone, I stopped. Well, that explains why she hasn't done anything. Perhaps I was unsettled by what I had done to her ring. Perhaps I was angry with her for leaving, even though the wars had started and lots of people were being separated from members of their families, as travel and communication became increasingly erratic, and in some areas broke down completely. Postcards from my father stopped during the wars. But I knew my gran loved me, knew that she wouldn't have left me again if she hadn't had to. I still stopped trying to do the things she taught me. It was as if our time by the lake was a different life. My life away from the lake, away from my gran, was the life my mother had chosen for me. In which my father's heritage did not exist. Although I went to school with several kids from important magic-handling families, and some of them liked to show off what they could do, I was never really tempted. I oohed and awed with the ordinary kids, and my last name, Charlie's last name, gave nothing away. By the time the wars had ended, I was a teenager. Perhaps I'd convinced myself that the games by the lake with my gran had only been children's games, and if I remembered anything else, I was dreaming. Or the hypes or trippers that I'd had been unusually good. It's not as though my gran ever came back and reminded me otherwise. But Gran was right about my heritage not going away because everyone was pretending it didn't exist. I hadn't been near that place, that somewhere inside me, for 15 years. But when I went back there that morning, kneeling in the sunshine, it wasn't just there. It had changed, grown. It was as if what my gran had done, what we had done together, was plant a sapling. It didn't matter to the sapling that we'd then gone away and left it. It went on with becoming a tree. My heritage was the soil it had grown in. But I had never done anything this difficult. I hadn't done anything at all in 15 years. Do you really never forget how to ride a bicycle? If you could ride a bicycle, could you ride a super mega Thor turbocharged several million something or other motorcycle? The kind you can hear from 6 blocks away that you'd have to stand on tiptoe to straddle. The first time you tried? I felt the power gathering below the nape of my neck, between my shoulder blades. That place on my back burned as if the sunlight I knelt in was too strong. There was an unpleasant sense of pressure building, like the worst case of heartburn you can imagine, and then it exploded and shot down my arms in fiery threads. And there was almost an audible clunk. Or maybe it was audible. I opened my hands. My arms felt weak as if I'd lifted a boulder. There was a key lying in my right palm. "You're a magic handler, a transmuter," said the vampire in that strange voice I no longer always found expressionless. I heard him being surprised. "Not much of one," I said. "A small stuff changer only." The kids from the magic handling families taught the rest of us some slang. Calling a transmuter a stuff changer was pretty insulting, almost as bad as calling a sorcerer a charm twister. I thought you couldn't look at me in sunlight. "The sound and smell of magic were too strong to ignore. Your body is shading your hands," he said. I extended the foot with the shackle on it. This was the real moment. My heart was beating as if there was a vampire in the room. "Well, honey, there is one. You're talking to it. Ha, ha, ha." My hand was shaking badly, but I found the odd little keyhole, fumbled my new key in it, and turned it. Click. She fucking transmuted a key. "Well done," he whispered. I looked out the window. It was maybe 7 o'clock. I had about 12 hours. I was already exhausted, but I would be running for my life. How far could adrenaline get me? I had a vague but practical idea where I was. The lake itself was a great orienter. All I had to do was keep it on my right, and I would come to where I'd left my car. Eventually. Probably 20 miles, if I'd remember the shape of the shore correctly. If I stayed close to the lake, I could avoid the bad spot behind the house, and I would have to hope there weren't any bad spots between me and my car that I couldn't get around. Would I be able to change my shackle key into a car key? I doubted the vampires would have folded up my discarded clothing with the key in the jeans pocket and left it for me on the driver's seat. God, I love her wit. It's so funny. Surely I could do 20-odd miles in 12 hours, even after the 2 nights and a day I'd just had. I turned to the vampire. I looked at him for the first time that day, for the first time since I'd bled on him. He had shut his eyes again. I stepped out of the sunlight, and his eyes opened. I stepped toward him, knelt down beside him. I felt his eyes drop to my bloody breast. My blood on his chest had crusted. He hadn't tried to wipe it off. Laura, lick it up. Give me your ankle, I said. Why? What? There was a long pause. Why? He said at last. I don't like bullies, I said. Honor among thieves. Take your pick. He shook his head slowly. It is... There was an even longer pause. It is a kind thought. I wonder what depths he'd had to plumb to come up with the word kind. But it's no use. Beau's folk encircle this place. The size of the clear area around this house is precisely the size of the area Beau thinks can be kept close guarded. You will not be wrong about this. You will be able to pass that ring now in daylight while all sane vampires are shielded and in repose, but the moment I can move out of this place, so will my guards be moving. And you aren't, of course, at your best and brightest, I added silently. I stood up and stepped back into the sunlight and felt it on my skin and thought about the big tree where a tiny sapling used to be. There are a lot of trees, and a tree symbolism in the magic done to ward or contain the others because trees are impervious to dark magic. And then I thought about traps and trapped things, and about when the evil of the dark was clearly evil, when it was not quite so clearly evil. There was a very long pause. A while I felt the sunlight soaking through my skin, soaking into the tree that up till a few minutes ago I hadn't known was there. Felt the leaves of my tree unfurl, stretched like tiny hands to take it in. I was scared. No, let me do that. I missed the line. I was tired. I was scared. I was stupefied. I'd just done an important piece of magic. I was tranced out. I thought I heard a wind in the leaves of my tree, and the wind of my voice, and it said, yes. Then you'll have to come with me, I said. For road trip time? There was another silence, but when he spoke, his voice struck at me as if it might itself draw blood. Do not torment, he said. As I have been merciful to you, as merciful as I can be. Do not tease me now. Go and live. Go. Wow, he's so cynical, understandably so, that he doesn't even believe that she would take him with him. I looked down at him. He was not looking at me, but then I was standing in the sunlight again. I stepped out of the sunlight, but he still did not look at me. I'm sorry, I said. I am not teasing you. If you will not let me try the shackle on your ankle, give me your hand instead. I held my hand out, down toward him, still sitting cross-legged on the floor. More priceless sunlit moments passed. Would you rather die, whatever, like a rat in a trap? I said, more harshly than I meant. I haven't noticed you getting any better offers. I didn't see him move, of course. He was just standing there, standing beside me, his hand in my hand. It was the first time I had seen him standing. His hand felt as inhuman as the rest of him looked. The right shape and everything, but all wrong. Wrong in some fathomless, indefinable, turning the world on its end way. Also, there was the smell. Standing beside him, it was almost overwhelming. Mind you, he smelled a lot better than I did. I needed a bath like you don't want to imagine. There isn't much that stinks worse than fear. But he didn't smell human. Oh, excuse me, sorry about that. He didn't smell animal or vegetable or mineral. He smelled vampire. I took a deep breath anyway. Then I stepped back into the sunlight, still holding his hand, drawing it after me. His arm unbent and let me do it. The sunlight struck his hand halfway up the wheeled forearm. Some subtle change occurred, subtle but profound. The feeling of his hand in mine was no longer a threat to everything that made me human. The hand became an undertaking, an enterprise, a piece of work. Maybe not that much different from flour and water and yeast and a rapidly approaching deadline of hungry, focused customers. I felt the power moving through me. It did not come in fiery threads this time, but in slow, fat, curly ripples. The ripples made me feel a little peculiar, as if there was an actual thing or things moving around in my insides, shouldering my liver and stomach aside, twisting among my bowels. I tried to relax and let the ripples wiggle and squirm as they wished. I had to know if I could do this, do what I was offering to do, for a long time, possibly till sunset, possibly 12 hours or more. Could I bear this invasion that long, even though I was inviting it? Or what if I overestimated my strength, like a diver overestimating how long she could hold her breath? I was demented. The most impressive thing I had ever done before today was turn a very pretty ring into an ugly botch. And I would have this vampire's life totally in my hands. I was trying to save the life of a vampire. The ripples spread through me, first balancing themselves cautiously like kids standing on a teeter-totter, then slowly, gently, finding spaces where they could settle themselves down on various bits of my inner anatomy, like the last customers during the early breakfast rush finding the last available seats. God damn, that's a really good sentence. Most of me was already full of things like heart and spleen and kidneys, but there were gaps where the power could fit itself in, attach itself to its surroundings, tap into me. I felt very full. As the connections were made, as the power made itself at home, the ripples began to change. Now they felt like the straps of a harness being settled in place. Buckets let out of buckets. Buckles, sorry, it doesn't say buckets. Buckles let out a little here, taken in a little there. When they were done, it felt like a good fit. I thought I could do it. I sighed. I could no longer see my tree, because I had become it, embodied it. It grew in me. It sapped my blood, its branches my limbs. The power wrapped round it like ropes and cables, flew from its boughs like banners and streamers. Perhaps the next time there was wind in my hair, it would rustle like leaves. Yes! I held out my right hand, and he put his left hand into it. I drew him, all the rest of him, into the bright rectangle in front of the window. Vampire skin looks like hell in sunlight, by the way. Maybe bursting into flames is to be preferred. I don't even know. I wouldn't even know how to describe this book to another human being. Holy shit.